Imagine you've known someone your entire life. You grew up together. You hunted together. You laughed around the same campfire. For years, nothing seemed unusual. Then, little by little, something changed. At first, they stopped joining conversations. When everyone else laughed, they stared into the distance. Some nights they wandered away from camp without saying a word. Other times, they spoke to someone nobody else could see. One afternoon, they became terrified of a place they had walked through 100 times before. The next morning, they insisted a stranger had been following them. Nobody had seen anyone. Their family couldn't explain it. Neither could anyone else. Now imagine living 40,000 years ago. There are no hospitals, no therapists, no brain scans. Nobody has heard words like schizophrenia, psychosis, or bipolar disorder. The human brain is just as complicated as it is today. People simply don't know why it sometimes stops behaving the way everyone expects. What happens next? Do they stay with the group? Does someone try to help them? Are they feared, ignored, protected, or left behind? It's one of the hardest questions archaeology has ever tried to answer. Not because ancient people left confusing records, they left almost none. Before writing, almost every conversation, belief, and memory disappeared with the people who carried them. The ground keeps bones surprisingly well. Thoughts? Not so much. That's the challenge. You can hold a skull that is 50,000 years old. You can see where a broken arm healed. You can measure worn teeth and damaged joints. You can even discover what someone ate during the last years of their life. But you cannot ask them what they dreamed about. You cannot ask whether they heard voices. You cannot know whether they lived with crippling anxiety or terrifying delusions. The evidence simply isn't there. That doesn't mean the question is impossible. It just means we have to ask it differently. Instead of searching for mental illness itself, archaeologists look for traces of human behavior. Who survived when survival should have been almost impossible? Who received care? Who remained part of the community despite extraordinary difficulties? Those clues don't give us every answer. Sometimes they don't even give us the question. But together, they reveal something about the people standing beside them. Life in the Ice Age rarely slowed down for anyone. Food had to be found before the next storm arrived. Firewood had to be gathered before the temperature dropped. Children had to be carried. Water had to be fetched. Every day asked something from every member of the group. At first, that makes an uncomfortable idea seem reasonable. If someone became too sick to hunt, or too weak to walk, wouldn't the rest of the group simply move on? For a long time, that was exactly how many people imagined prehistoric life. The picture seemed obvious. A harsh world would produce harsh decisions. Then archaeologists began uncovering lives that didn't fit that picture. One of them belonged to a Neanderthal who lived roughly 50,000 years ago. His remains were found inside Shanidar Cave, in what is now northern Iraq. Today, researchers call him Shanidar I. His skeleton tells a difficult story. One arm had been so badly injured that it was probably of little use for the rest of his life. One leg carried signs of severe damage. His hearing had likely become limited. Injuries around one eye may have left him partially blind. None of those conditions appeared shortly before his death. The bones had healed. That means he lived with them for years. Imagine trying to keep pace with a hunting group while barely able to use one arm. Imagine climbing rocky hills with an injured leg. Imagine listening for danger when your hearing no longer worked as it once had. None of those challenges made survival impossible. Together, they made it extraordinarily difficult. No one can say exactly what daily life looked like for Shanidar I. Archaeology doesn't preserve conversations. It doesn't tell us who carried extra firewood or who shared their food. Those details disappeared tens of thousands of years ago. Even so, many researchers think surviving with injuries like these would have been extremely unlikely without help from other members of his community. Shanidar I isn't the only example. In the country of Georgia, archaeologists discovered the skull of an elderly individual from Dmanisi, dating to around 1.8 million years ago. Nearly every tooth had been lost long before death. Eating tough meat or raw plants would have been incredibly difficult. Yet this person lived for years after losing those teeth. Someone may have prepared softer food. We can't prove that happened. But the skeleton leaves us with the same question. How does someone survive alone under those conditions? Thousands of years later, another discovery appeared in southern Italy. A young man known as Romito II had been born with a rare condition that affected the growth of his bones. Walking would have been challenging. Many everyday tasks would have required more effort than they did for others in the group. Yet he reached adolescence before he died. His burial was carefully prepared, just like the others around him. These discoveries come from different places, different times, and even different human species. They don't tell exactly the same story, but together they point in a similar direction. Prehistoric communities were capable of caring for people who could not always contribute in the ways we usually imagine. That doesn't mean every group behaved the same way. Human societies have always been different. Some may have been compassionate. Others may have made choices we would find difficult to understand today. The archaeological record cannot speak for every community that ever existed. It only lets us meet a few individuals whose stories happen to survive. Even so, those individuals quietly challenge one of our oldest assumptions. Strength wasn't measured only by how hard someone could throw a spear. Sometimes, strength meant making sure another person reached tomorrow. But this still leaves us with our original question. An injured arm leaves marks on a skeleton. A broken leg can heal inside the bone. Mental illness rarely leaves anything behind. If someone heard voices or became trapped inside frightening thoughts, what evidence would remain after 40,000 years? Almost none. And that forces archaeologists to search somewhere else, not in bones, but in the beliefs people carried with them. If someone broke their arm, time usually left a record. The bone healed. Years later, an archaeologist could still see where the fracture happened. The same is true for many diseases. Arthritis slowly changes the joints. Repeated hard work wears down the spine. Even a serious infection can sometimes leave marks behind. Mental illness is different. A person could spend years hearing voices, living with terrifying delusions, or sinking into a depression so deep they barely spoke to anyone around them, and after death, their skeleton might look completely ordinary. That silence has frustrated archaeologists for generations. The people themselves are gone. Their thoughts disappeared with them. All that remains is whatever their community left behind. Sometimes, that isn't much. Imagine two people buried side by side. One died after a hunting accident. The other may have spent years living with a condition we would recognize today as schizophrenia. Thousands of years later, their graves are uncovered. The bones tell us their age, whether they were male or female, what they ate, perhaps even where they grew up. But the mind leaves almost nothing behind. That's why archaeologists rarely claim to have found evidence of mental illness in prehistoric burials. The evidence simply isn't strong enough. Instead, researchers look somewhere else. They ask a different question. How have human societies explained unusual behavior when they had no knowledge of the brain? Written history offers many different answers. In some places, unusual behavior was understood through religion. Elsewhere, it was connected to spirits, ancestors, curses, or unseen forces. None of those explanations were universal. They changed from one culture to another, just as languages and traditions did. Prehistory was almost certainly no different. A group living in Ice Age France may not have understood the world the same way as another group thousands of kilometers away in Siberia. Even neighboring communities could have held different beliefs. Without writing, those beliefs vanished. Anthropologists have sometimes looked to modern hunter-gatherer societies for clues. Not because these communities are living fossils. They aren't. Every society alive today has its own long and unique history. But they remind us of something important. There has never been one human way of understanding the world. Among some indigenous cultures documented over the last few centuries, people who experienced vivid dreams, powerful visions, or altered states of consciousness were sometimes respected as healers or spiritual specialists. Other societies interpreted similar experiences very differently. The same behavior could be welcomed in one community and feared in another. Even today, culture shapes how people understand mental illness. That makes it unlikely that every prehistoric group shared a single explanation. The farther back we travel, the more possibilities remain open. Perhaps one family believed their relative had been touched by spirits. Perhaps another simply thought illness had changed the mind, even if they couldn't explain how. Perhaps some communities tried to comfort the person. Perhaps others kept their distance. The truth is, we don't know. And sometimes the most honest answer archaeology can give is exactly that. Still, there is one remarkable discovery that suggests prehistoric people were willing to do something extraordinary when they believed a serious problem needed attention. Not a prayer, not a burial, a hole in the skull. Around 7,000 years ago, somewhere in Europe, a person sat perfectly still while someone began scraping their skull. There was no modern operating room, no anesthesia, no machines quietly monitoring a heartbeat, just stone tools, steady hands, and an incredible amount of trust. Bit by bit, the outer layer of bone became thinner, then thinner still, until finally, an opening appeared. Today, archaeologists call this procedure trepanation. It's one of the oldest forms of surgery ever discovered. The oldest known examples date back thousands of years. And over time, the practice appeared across much of the world, from Europe and Africa to Asia and the Americas. What surprises researchers isn't simply that people attempted it, it's that many survived. Some skulls show clear signs of new bone growing around the opening. That healing could only happen if the person lived for months, sometimes years, after the operation. Imagine how much had to go right. The patient had to survive the procedure itself. The wound had to stay clean enough to avoid a fatal infection. Someone probably cared for them while they recovered. For people living thousands of years before antibiotics, that alone is extraordinary. The harder question is, why? The honest answer is that nobody knows for certain. Some skulls belonged to people who had suffered head injuries. Opening the skull may have relieved pressure caused by bleeding or swelling. In those cases, the procedure might have saved a life. Other skulls show no obvious sign of trauma. Researchers have suggested many possibilities: chronic headaches, epilepsy, ritual practices, or illnesses that people believed had a spiritual cause. Each idea fits some cases. None explains them all. That uncertainty is important. Whenever archaeologists discover a hole in an ancient skull, it's tempting to invent the rest of the story. Perhaps the person heard voices. Perhaps they had seizures. Perhaps their family believed something invisible had taken hold of them. Those are fascinating possibilities. They are also possibilities. The bones don't tell us which one is true, and sometimes they refuse to tell us anything at all. That can feel frustrating. We naturally want history to give clear answers. Who was this person? What were they thinking? Did the operation help? Did they recover? The silence can be uncomfortable, yet that silence is part of archaeology. Every discovery answers one question and quietly creates three more. Perhaps that's what makes these ancient skulls so remarkable. They don't simply show us one of humanity's earliest surgeries. They remind us that long before people understood the brain, they were already trying to help it. If you'd like to explore more stories like this, consider subscribing.